Good morning and welcome to Daily Cyber Briefing for Thursday, the 9th of October. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Well, you might be aware, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you will be definitely aware that I am concerned about preparations for a post-quantum world from a technology perspective. There are many things that are currently impossible that will become possible once quantum computing has become more commonplace. One of the most concerning things is that anything which is currently encrypted will be decryptable in very, very short periods, like very small time frames, very short periods of time. So the migration from pre-quantum encryption to post-quantum encryption is going to take a while. It's not going to be a simple migration. I think that quantum computing is going to sneak up on a lot of people, and they're going to find themselves with a very large program of work to address the risks, to even identify the risks and work out what to do. So there is a there's a new article in Cybersecurity News that talks very much about this. Basically, the article's titled Why Businesses Must Act Now to Prepare for a Quantum Safe Future. And it points out that these things are much closer than most people realize, and that there are things that need to be done in order to ensure that at the very least, the organizations understand the risks and have put in place mitigations and migration plans and so on and so forth. So it's difficult. It's hard to think of anybody who shouldn't, anybody in cyber, anybody in tech who shouldn't be aware of this and thinking about this. Because at least at the moment, part of a decent security program, decent security policies would be that, at least most of your data needs to be, all the key data needs to be encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit. Well, that's all well and good, but if that encryption is rendered null and void, something will have to be done to address the risk, bearing in mind, okay, that encryption is not it's not a binary on-off type. It's safe, it's not safe. Okay, any encryption algorithm can be broken. Anything that is encrypted can be decrypted. It is a matter of time and effort. That means that the value of the data needs to have reduced to zero before, well, in a shorter period of time than it would take for an attacker to decrypt that particular piece of data. Now, let's say at the moment it takes 10,000 years of brute force with the world's fastest computer to break some of the, decrypt things that are encrypted with the best algorithms that are available right now. I don't know whether those figures might not be absolutely right, but we're talking very, very long periods of time. If that suddenly became seconds, okay, that's an issue, because the data that has value, that as far as you're concerned, it takes a functionally infinite amount of time to decrypt it, i.e. you will never be able to make use of that data. So you can put in there long-standing secrets, long-standing pieces of information that, things that have value for a very long period of time, and be confident that they're not going to be decrypted unless a vulnerability is found on that, but we're ignoring that for the moment. This is just like very straightforward, going in through the front door. If, however, in a year's time, the amount of time taken to decrypt that reduces from hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years to a few seconds or a few minutes, that's an issue. So then all this data that gets exfiltrated in ransomware attacks, but you are sat there thinking, no, it's okay, it's encrypted, we've managed our keys really well, they're not going to be able to actually get the data out of this stuff. Well, they'll just sit on it and wait until quantum computing allows them to, and then they'll decrypt it. So if that data has any value at that point, then you're in trouble. Do you see what I mean? Do you see where I'm going with this? So begin to think. Don't leave it up to your vendors and your suppliers to think for you. At the very least, make sure that you've done a risk assessment on what happens. Just model, do a tabletop exercise. What happens if suddenly everything that is encrypted became unencrypted? Okay, where are the risks? What impact could those things have on your business? What's the likelihood of that data being used in malicious ways or for nefarious purposes or whatever it might be? So think about it. It needs planning, needs thought. So keep on top of the news. This article, if you have been parking this whole concept as not quite sure what to do with it yet, we'll come to it later. Read this article. It's not a long article and it's not a technical article. It talks about things from the perspective of the state of the union, as it were. So where are we at the moment? What's just around the corner, and how can you begin to prepare for it? Talking about making sure that you're prepared for things, one question which regularly comes up in discussion, both internally and with customers, and historically, between, because I've worked on both sides of the fence, the vendor and the customer side of the fence. What are the metrics? What are the things that you should be measuring in order to get some idea about whether you're secure or not? And yeah, there are frameworks. And so you could say, well, let's measure whether you've got ISO 27001. Let's measure whether you've got Cyber Essentials Plus or whatever. But actually, one of the key things in these areas, what are not the individual items, but the core components that you need to be thinking about. And so I came across a very interesting article in HelpNet Security this morning that talks about 6 core indicators. And those indicators are, now I don't necessarily agree with the order of these, cyber insurance or audit certification coverage. So basically what they're talking about there is how well have you done your preparation? How well have you thought about your risks, and have you got them covered? The next one I think is fascinating because it rarely comes up. It's something that I bang on about internally and have done for a long time, but it rarely comes up in discussions. But it's around aging vulnerabilities. So vulnerability management is a very thorny area. Vulnerability metrics are easy to generate. There's tooling out there that will create you thousands of pages for even a small organization of all the vulnerabilities that can be found in the estate. Some of it's agent-based, some of it can be done through scanning, whatever it might be. You can end up with this enormous list of vulnerabilities that are floating about in your environment. Quantifying those, excuse me. Should I be on camera? I'm not sure I should be on camera. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I am these days. Quantifying those vulnerabilities, it can be done in various sorts of ways. You can take various sorts of criticality scores. CVSS scores are the common ones that people use. They actually really ought to be interpreted in the light of your individual organization and what matters from a business risk perspective within your organization, because the CVSS scores do tend to be measurements looking through a technical cyber lens more than anything else. But the one that people don't talk about, which I think is really important, so I very much agree with the article here, is about the age of the vulnerabilities. So as a measure of whether you're doing a good job of keeping on top of vulnerabilities, if you plotted a simple plot, the date or the year that a vulnerability was first discovered and the number of vulnerabilities that are extant, as in existing still in your organization. Okay, what you would expect to see is that very recent vulnerabilities, there aren't very many because you may not have moved on to those versions. You may not, they're new. However, they build up in time. So there's a ramp up of all possible vulnerabilities. However, you're mitigating them, so you're reducing that graph. So you tend to have a graph which is kind of like humped and then has a bit of a tail. And what you don't want is for that tail to be too long. Or what is interesting if you plot these things out is you then find that there are mini humps in the very old vulnerability end of the scale. And those things tend to be devices that have just been forgotten or lost and have been found through scanning. People didn't even know they were still there. That server that your devs had under their desk 10 years ago that's still running Windows 95 or whatever the bloody hell it is, that sort of stuff. You also then find things which can't be touched. So components are on a server or on a system are vulnerable, but you can't do anything about them because they're running a business process, and the business process is critical. So if you have a look, ideally, you're going to have to accept that there's going to be a peak, which is somewhere between the current date and, let's say, 3, 6, 9 months old, because these are vulnerabilities that are being worked through. Ideally, you want to squash that. 4 to 6 weeks is quite realistic if you're working hard on vulnerability management, but it does mean that involves quite a lot of thought and some process and some dedication and actually some metrics. People have got to be targeted with actually achieving a low vulnerability environment. It won't just happen as an afterthought. If that's not their KPIs, if their bonuses don't depend on that stuff, it will get pushed back because people will focus on the stuff that lines their pockets, or the stuff that's interesting, or other things. They won't do vulnerability management unless there is a reason for them to do vulnerability management. And being secure isn't a good enough reason. They need a compelling event, effectively. So you're going to have things that are relatively recent, but what you really want to do is to be pushing the tail back towards the current stuff. So you want very few, if any, old vulnerabilities floating about within your environment. So I think that's a really key one. That's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to bring this particular article to people's attention, because it talks about it in here. It talks about it very briefly. There's only a paragraph or so on it, but old weaknesses are regularly exploited, but they can be exploited by all sorts of people, not just the APTs everybody talks about. So yeah, aged vulnerabilities is a really good metric to be looking at. Then they talk about significant incidents, containment time. Yeah, good luck with that one. Containment time and restoration time. Well, restoration time is relatively measurable, depending on the kind of cyber incident that you've got, because you can use a lot of ITIL stuff, and most organizations have got the ability to measure things in ITIL ways. So, restoration time from a ransomware incident, how long to get the business running again after you've been, all your environment's been encrypted. Now, what's interesting, I think, especially interesting with the likes of M&S and Jaguar Land Rover and so on, is that they've taken, and others actually, have taken an inordinate amount of time to recover from the incident and to get back to proper business running. I mean, Jaguar Land Rover, JLR, have even put their suppliers at risk by shutting down manufacturing and not ordering stuff and so on and so forth. So, there are knock-on effects for all of these things. Now, if you roll that back, if that wasn't a cyber incident, but had been a more traditional ITIL-based incident, which could have had exactly the same outcome from a business service perspective, even though the method of disrupting the business is different. A regional event, huge power outages, floods, earthquakes, all sorts of things. They can have very significant impacts on a business. It shows to me that the business continuity planning in those organizations wasn't right. So this isn't it's being treated as in the press as a cyber issue, but it isn't. It's actually a business continuity issue. Something happened. The disaster was a cyber disaster. It wasn't an earthquake. Yeah, but it was still a disaster. So disaster happened. Business was not able to recover quickly. So restoration time, being able to get your critical business services in working and to be able to return to normal operations, measuring that is a very good metric. And you should be able to do that in a very short period of time. Your BCP plans should be based around what services do you need to restore quickly? How do you restore those services? Where do you restore those services? What comms do you send out around those things? So restoration time is a very good measure. And it's certainly very achievable to measure that and to focus on reducing that time. Containment time is very interesting because I've yet to be involved in a cyber incident where the start point is known with confidence. There are ways you can define start point, but it tends to be the start point is the first point that I've noticed something going on. So you always, as a defender, spot something in the middle. You never see the very beginning. Now, you might be able to look back and reconstruct what went on before the point that you've identified, but your timeline kind of starts in the middle. The bits go forward, bits go backwards. It depends how good your logging, alerting, your security visibility is as to how far back you can go. But even then, there will be things that have been going on way before that point that you're just not aware of. If you look at the Lockheed Martin kill chain, yes, criticized, blah blah blah, but it's criticized by people I think that are looking to pick holes in things. It's very useful. It's not perfect, nothing's perfect, but it's very useful. If you look at it, the stuff at the beginning you would never see anyway. The likelihood that you'll catch reconnaissance, very, very unlikely that you'll catch good reconnaissance on you. You absolutely can't be inside the head of the attackers trying to work out. You're not going to know why they're focusing on you, or even if they are focusing, you might be an opportunistic target, you might be an actual target. You never know why, how they got there. So there's a load of stuff that is happening before that first touch point. But if you take it from the first touch point you can identify through to when you were able to implement containment and stop the propagation of this particular attack, okay, that you could say it's not a brilliant metric because, as I say, the starting point is a bit variable. But it isn't a bad metric, and you certainly, as an order of magnitude, ROM or V, very rough order of magnitude kind of stuff, you should be able to say, well, we spotted it, and then we could do something about it. I would argue that actually one of the metrics that isn't in this article that I would think would be very good to have in this article would be around detections. So a measure of how comprehensive your ability to detect malicious activity is. And that's an area most organizations are very poor at. They assume that the logs that come out of technical security controls, as in antivirus, we've got Defender, so we've got visibility. No, you've got Defender, so you've got technical security control. It tells you what it's seen, doesn't tell you anything else. So it isn't a visibility tool, it's a defense tool. People struggle with those concepts, but we can talk about that another time. However, I think that a measure of how good your ability to detect stuff is would be perhaps the seventh one. The sixth one, by the way, is workforce gap. So unfulfilled cybersecurity roles, those sorts of things. So it's interesting. I've never worked anywhere that's had trouble filling cybersecurity roles. We At TSC, we absolutely have no problem at all filling cybersecurity roles. Don't know. It's just, but apparently maybe organisations that struggle are, maybe they need to have a think about their job descriptions. Maybe they need to think about, what it is they're trying to do in that space, because it may be that it isn't that there aren't people, it's just that the role is weird, or the role is unattractive. So that is something that is worth having a look at. It's definitely worth a read if you are senior and you're responsible for metrics associated with information security. Those are not bad things to consider. Right, and then finally, we're running over slightly, but finally today, the data breach from Discord has been estimated at being about 1.5 terabytes of data and something in the region of 2 million government ID photos. Now, the reason I'm bringing it to people's attention is because of the government ID photos. Off the back of the online not very safe act, or Safety Act, age verification has become, it's very thorny. Like, ask any 13-year-old boy and he'll tell you how you get around that stuff. Because quite frankly, that's where innovation lies in this space, and it's pretty trivial to get around the Online Safety Act, or Online Safety Act, whatever the thing's called. However, people who are trying to play by the game are finding themselves required to upload government documentation, your passport photos or your driver's license or whatever it was. Well, guess what? 2 million of them appear to have been nicked by the team that that compromised Discord. Why does this matter, you may ask? Well, right now, in order to use, let's say, my driving license as proof of age, okay, you have to have a picture of my driving license. There are not many pictures of my driving license, and they've not been shared with many people over the years. And when they have been shared, they've been shared in, as far as I can ascertain, secure ways. If, however, it's in a data dump and any nefarious oik has a picture of my driving license, they then know my name, my date of birth, my address, and a piece of government ID, my driving license number, and my photo, which, if asked for age verification, would give them very simple ability to undertake identity theft in that sense, or just impersonate me. Right. So yeah, I was going to say unforeseen consequences, but highly predictable and very well predicted consequence of stupid law has resulted in sensitive information being in the hands of criminals. Don't worry, we'll just charge all the criminals under GDPR. Yeah, right. Yeah, good one. Read the article. You will get an insight into why I am firmly against digital IDs and all the rest of it. I can see no good coming out of it at all. And that's the end of my rant for a Thursday. Hope you have a great day, and I will speak to you all again tomorrow morning.